Gerhard Barkhorn was a German fighter pilot whose life followed the path of a young man drawn into the turbulence of the Second World War, shaped by the demands of aerial combat, and later carried into a long career in the post-war German Air Force. His story is often remembered for his extraordinary success as a fighter ace, but it also reflects the complexities, challenges, and personal struggles faced by many pilots of his era. Despite serving in a military force tied to a destructive and criminal regime, his life as an aviator is studied mostly for his flying skill, his leadership, and the immense pressures he endured during years of intense air battles. He was born in 1919 in Königsberg, a city that was then in East Prussia and is now part of Russia. As a child, he grew up in a Germany, still dealing with the aftermath of the First World War. Like many young people of his generation, he was fascinated by aviation, a field that was advancing quickly and captured the imagination of the public. After finishing school, he joined the Luftwaffe, the Air Force of Nazi Germany, which was expanding rapidly in the late 1930s. At that time, he was not yet a remarkable pilot, and his early training was mostly ordinary. Still, he worked hard to improve his skills, showing determination and a calm personality that would later define his combat style. When the war began in 1939, Barkhorn did not immediately enter combat. He spent time in training units, slowly refining his flying and adjusting to the demands of military aviation. He finally joined a frontline fighter wing in 1940 during the Battle of Britain, but he did not score any victories during that campaign. His early missions were difficult, and he even crash-landed more than once. Rather than discouraging him, these early setbacks taught him caution and discipline. Experienced pilots noted that he did not rely on aggression alone. He flew patiently, observed carefully, and used opportunities only when he felt confident he could succeed. This careful, steady approach contrasted with the more daring style of many other young pilots. Barkhorn's skill began to stand out when he was transferred to the Eastern Front in 1941 as part of the massive German invasion of the Soviet Union. The air battles there were intense and continuous, often fought at low altitude, in rapidly changing weather, and over huge distances. It was in this demanding environment that he truly developed into one of the most successful fighter pilots of the war. Flying the Messerschmitt Bf-19, he began to score victories against Soviet aircraft, gradually building a reputation as a reliable and effective pilot. Although he would eventually achieve more than 300 aerial victories, he did not advance quickly. His early success came slowly compared to other well-known pilots, and he was never the type to boast or push himself forward. He preferred teamwork and often credited the efforts of his fellow pilots and ground crews rather than his own talent. By 1942 and 1943, however, his abilities had become undeniable. He climbed the ranks within his fighter wing, taking on greater leadership roles and mentoring younger pilots. His calm manner and steady focus made him respected by those who served with him. Unlike some other aces, Barkhorn avoided unnecessary risks. He believed that survival was as important as victory, and this mindset helped him endure years of constant combat. Despite his cautious nature, he faced many dangers. He was shot down more than once and suffered injuries, including wounds from anti-aircraft fire and cockpit shrapnel. Each time he returned to flying after recovering, determined to continue supporting his unit. His endurance became one of his defining traits. By early 1944, he had become one of the highest-scoring fighter aces in history. His achievements earned him awards and promotions, and he was eventually named commander of a fighter group. Though he was celebrated within the Luftwaffe, he rarely showed interest in fame. He focused instead on his duties and on keeping his pilots safe during missions that were becoming increasingly difficult as Germany began to lose control of the air war. The later years of the war were especially hard. The Soviet Air Force grew more capable, and Germany suffered from fuel shortages, equipment problems, and heavy losses. Barkhorn's role as a leader required him to make difficult decisions and support young pilots who faced overwhelming odds. Even though he continued to score victories, the situation grew desperate. In 1944, he was seriously wounded when his aircraft was hit, forcing him to bail out. The injuries kept him grounded for months, marking one of the longest breaks of his combat career. When he returned, Germany was already nearing defeat. He was briefly part of an elite jet fighter unit, formed to defend against Allied bombers, but he saw little success in this final period. In May 1945, the war ended, and Barkhorn, like many military personnel, was taken into captivity. He spent time as a prisoner of war before eventually being released. The collapse of the country he had served left him, and many others, facing an uncertain future. After the war, he tried to build a stable civilian life. He married his longtime partner, Kreisel, and worked various jobs, including positions in civilian aviation. For several years he avoided military service, as Germany was occupied and later divided. When West Germany established a new defense force in the 1950s, he chose to join the modern German Air Force, known as the Bundeswehr. His experience as a wartime pilot made him valuable, and he was given roles involving planning and organizational development rather than combat duty. He trained on new aircraft and took part in building Germany's post-war aviation structure, which operated under democratic control and was fully integrated with Western defense alliances. His post-war career was respectable, though not as dramatic as his wartime service. He served in several commands, earned promotions, and continued working with aviation until he chose to retire in the 1960s. During this period, he was known as a thoughtful officer who seldom spoke of his wartime achievements. His attitude remained modest, and he focused on professionalism rather than personal glory. Tragedy struck late in his life. In 1969, he and his wife were involved in a serious car accident. He survived at first, but the injuries were severe, and he died shortly afterward at the age of 49. His wife also suffered critical injuries and passed away soon after. Their sudden deaths shocked those who knew them and ended the life of a man who had spent decades in high-risk environments, only to be lost through a road accident. Gerhard Barkhorn's legacy is tied mainly to his status as one of the highest-scoring fighter pilots in history. His record places him second among all fighter aces, surpassed only by Erich Hartmann, a close friend and fellow pilot. However, Barkhorn's significance lies not only in numbers, but also in his character. He was known for his calm temperament, careful flying, and loyalty to his comrades. Even during a war shaped by destructive ideology, he tried to conduct himself with professionalism and focused on the technical demands of flying rather than politics. Historians today often study him to better understand the realities of air combat on the Eastern Front, the psychology of fighter pilots, and the long-term effects that years of conflict can have on individuals. His story shows both the extraordinary skill some pilots developed and the hardships they endured. It also demonstrates that many who fought for Germany during the war later contributed to the rebuilding of a peaceful European nation. While he served a regime responsible for enormous suffering, his personal experiences reflect the complicated nature of individuals caught in historical events much larger than themselves. His ability to survive hundreds of missions, his leadership under extreme conditions, and his years of service in the post-war Air Force all contribute to a fuller understanding of his life. Today, studies of Gerhard Barkhorn highlight his discipline, his humility, and the skill he developed through years of constant danger. His life, shaped by the rise and fall of his country and by the rapid evolution of aviation, remains a detailed example of how a pilot's personal qualities can influence both his successes and his survival.